Well, it's really great first to have a chance to meet both of you. I look forward to hopefully having some more collaboration with you now that I have joined BI. This is my third time attending the BAL Forum, my second time in person. The last time I gave a talk at BAL Forum was 2 years ago, and that was virtual. And it's really great to be back in China. It's one thing to be able to give a talk and communicate your ideas, but of course the most important thing is the informal interaction that takes place in an event like the BAL Forum. And one of the great things about the BAL Forum is that BAL Forum keeps it to a reasonable size of just about 1,500 or 2,000 people. And so you're really able to meet with senior business leaders and executives and exchange your views. There are a lot of smaller group discussions that take place on the edges of the BAL Forum that I think are really useful for advancing both China and the whole world. There were sort of two things that I was talking about. The session dealt with how one could have competition but also collaboration, which is something I'm very passionate about. And it was set in the innovation industries. And a lot of my research focuses around what sorts of management practices can help companies to be innovative. And so I talked about that as well. I'm actually what you might call a global citizen. I'm American by birth, and these days have American and Swedish nationality. I live in Norway, and a lot of my work focuses on China. More and more people are becoming rather global, and this is good for the world. I think collaboration is really, really critical. And I think the way to have some competition and collaboration at the same time may be to look for the areas that are easier to collaborate in. And I think one of the great possibilities may be, for example, in green technologies. This is actually the 10th year anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, which has been, I think, one of the really impressive policies that China has had. Initially, it was just about, going abroad, doing things abroad, linking countries together. But the Green Belt and Road Initiative says we could also pay attention to doing things in a way that is good for the environment. And this is something that I think everyone can get behind and get excited about. And I think is a way that the US and China may be able to collaborate much more. I think countries in the Nordic countries like Norway, where I'm based, also have an important role to play here. As you know, Norway is one of the leading countries in the world for green technologies. I first lived in China briefly in 2002, and then I was Dean of University of Nottingham Business School, China from 2011 to 2015. I'm sorry to say in those timeframes, China did not care that much about the environment. But as the standard of living has improved in China, the citizens of China have gotten really concerned, wanting to have a better quality of life, a better environment. Now, both the people of China and the government of China work really, really hard to have an improved environment. And you can see this, I'm an active runner, and it used to be when I was in China, I had to check what's the air quality before I went out and ran. Now you don't have to worry about that anymore because the air quality really has gotten so much better in China. So China is eager for green technologies. I think this is something that Norway and the US can both help China with. The famous professor from Harvard Business School, Michael Porter, he talks about what's called comparative advantage. And what he says is based on the unique capabilities that any particular country has, that there is not one best industry that all countries should be doing, but a certain industry that fits well for a particular country. That even inside one industry, different sub-industries can fit one country better than another. And this is why we need each other. We need not only to collaborate with each other, we also need to have people, meeting each other. Meeting people like I meet you now, it's, much more efficient for getting to know each other. Hopefully today I can be a little more effective when I'm teaching to executives in China, when I'm doing consulting work in China, when I'm doing my research, because I spent those 5 years living in China. And that's why I really encourage more exchange between people in different countries. I think that, China's going through an evolution. As you know, initially China was the factory of the world and focused on making fairly simple products as cheaply as possible. Now, over time, the Chinese government has put a high priority on trying to be an innovator and wants China to be the innovator of the world as well as the factory of the world. This is quite logical because people in China are getting used to higher and higher salaries, and to have those higher salaries, one needs to add more value. So it's really important for companies to be more innovative so that they can add more value. Now, how can you do that? I mean, of course, who wouldn't like to be innovative, but the question is how to do that. A lot of my research is focused around what management practices can help Chinese companies to be innovative. I've recently completed a study that's involved 200 companies in China and 160 companies in the Nordic countries, and looking at what drives innovation and what are the differences between China and the Nordic countries. So we find that the most important practice is different ways of sourcing knowledge, both externally, so looking around the world and finding ways to attract knowledge into your company, and also developing knowledge inside your company. And then once you have this knowledge, especially the most important part of this is managing that knowledge. So one company that I think has done an interesting thing about this inside of China is Great Wall, the car manufacturer. Well, this is a problem everywhere, but it's an extreme problem in China that many organizations tend to be very functionally oriented. So you have like the marketing department here and you have the R&D department here, and there's pretty good communication inside those, but not so much communication between. And you need everyone in the company working together. And to facilitate this, what Great Wall has done is they have started having their people sit in cross-functional units. So they don't have the marketing department in one place. They have some people from marketing with some people from R&D, with some people from finance, with some people from production sort of sitting in the same area. This is really helping a lot with knowledge transfer. They also have something that they call Happy Saturdays, where people from different departments take turns sharing information they have learned recently to make sure, again, that it's not an individual person having a learning, but the company having a learning. And then they use Ding Talk to try to sort of instantaneously share things. Because as you know, time is really critical in China. You know, things happen much, much faster than in Europe. And so you have to just share those thoughts immediately when you have them. So these are some things that are important. Another thing that's interesting is that we found that there are a lot of what we would call paradoxes in innovation. So for example, there is the need to think about sourcing knowledge externally and developing internally. There is a need to have some standardization of practices so that you understand how things work and you don't get chaos, but you also need some flexibility to be able to adjust things. There are a variety of these tensions. And many times people try to choose one end of the tension. Companies try to say either we do that or we do that. And our research finds that many of these tensions should actually both be pursued at the same time. So in other words, it's important to source externally knowledge and develop internally, to have some standardization of practices and some flexibility. And it turns out that Chinese managers are better at doing this than Nordic managers based on our research. And maybe this is not surprising because you know about yin-yang thinking in the Chinese history. Well, you know, maybe this sort of background of yin-yang thinking has helped Chinese managers to be able to embrace these somewhat conflicting ideas at the same time. So we think it's important both for Nordic managers and for Chinese managers to have this sort of paradoxical thinking. But in the Nordic countries, people are not so used to it, so they have some process losses. So you asked me, what do I think? Is it possible that Chinese companies could become innovative? And my answer is, I'm really quite optimistic about this, but I think more work is needed. There are great ways that we can collaborate together. Norway is such a small country that it will be, I guess, a tier 2 city in China. Norwegian companies need a larger market that China can provide. But considering that it's such a small country in terms of population, Norway has an amazing number of innovations. And I think there's something for China to learn about how to create these innovations. I think there's something for China to learn about, how to value the environment. When we talk about sort of the cultural fit between the countries, I think that there are some similarities and some differences which complement well. Both Norwegians and Chinese people like to work in teams and generally are pretty good at doing so. And this is one thing that I think is a similarity. Maybe in China, there is a greater tendency for hierarchy than in Norway, which tends to be extremely flat. So this is a difference, and maybe we have possibilities to learn from each other. Well, of course, it depends a little bit on each person, and that's one of the reasons that it's important to, really get to know your students in depth. But the most basic skill is thinking out of the box, problem solving. Now, you have the internet where you can find any information, and you have AI like ChatGPT. You need not to place a value on some facts or some knowledge, but on how you think, how you solve problems. Only the things that you actually can apply add value. So doing a lot of things like case studies where you present a problem and participants are supposed to try to solve this guided by a faculty member is really important. It's important even not just to have these written case studies, but to have actually what I would call a live case where business executives bring a problem into the classroom and can share that, and guided by a professor, students can try to solve that. These type of active learning approaches that don't only teach content, but help to teach content in a way that it can be readily applied in client companies is really important. The most important thing, the BI Fudan MBA program is teaching content that can be used in ways that they can then apply in their companies. One of the key things we try to do is try to create some new sparks, some new ideas to really transform the way of thinking of people. And this is, I think, probably the most important thing that we can do. We try to have a diverse group of faculty involved in the program. Bring together a mixture of international faculty that have knowledge about China and Chinese faculty that have global knowledge. But I think the important thing to stress is that international best practice is, of course, useful to understand, but it's much more valuable to have international best practice that's adapted for Chinese reality. And that is what is the strength of the BI Fudan BA program after so many years in existence. I think one of the most important things, as I've sort of hinted at before, is not just involving sort of the CEO of the company, but involving all people in the company in coming up with ideas and decision making. Increasingly, people in China have greater and greater skills at even lower levels in the organization, and these people need to be leveraged. And so I think this is one of the things that needs to be considered. I think also that in China, it's important to be able to do things at a really quick pace. And this is something that in general Chinese companies are probably quite good at. But often this has been done through, I would say, more trial and error, trying lots of different things just a little bit and sort of seeing what works. And what I'm more in favor of from a strategy point of view is different contingency planning. So thinking about a lot of different scenarios and sort of seeing if this happens, then we would do this. If this happens, we would do this. So I think contingency planning is something that can be really useful for dynamic environments like China, and is something that Chinese companies should make more efforts to even focus more attention on.